Please welcome back Raphael. And joining him virtually is Beju, fantastic. Beju Shah, who is head of the Toronto Centre.
Hello, everyone. Again, it's great to share some insights, connecting the dots, new frontiers in cybersecurity. I'm joined by Beju, who's held in Canada because he just transitioned there, and I guess the passport is still, the visa is still being issued, right? Which keeps the passport.
I have it now.
Oh.
The other night, so it's all good.
Very good. So we'll see you soon here in Basel, but for now we still have to do with a virtual Beju, who will still do a great show. And what we really want to talk about is a specific aspect of cybersecurity, the threat that quantum computers could pose to the financial system. These are still in an experimental phase today, but once they will mature, they will be able to break a large part of the cryptography that is being used to secure financial transactions today. And obviously, this can potentially jeopardize the integrity and privacy of financial data. And in this context, what we want to discuss today is, first, what is the problem that we're addressing? Second, how are we at the Innovation Hub tackling it? And third, also, what are the necessary actions from a central bank and supervisory perspective, a bit more broader? I'll introduce to the topic, then Beju will present two projects, Polaris and Fuse. Then I'll present LEAP, and I'll conclude with these considerations from a broader systemic perspective. So, let's start with a bit of computing history. Here we see two early stage computers 7 decades apart. On the left-hand side, you can see the ENIAC, which is a 1945 machine. It's a massive machine that had thousands of vacuum tubes that generated a lot of heat and that were actually prone to frequent failures. And actually there was considerable doubt whether this machine would ever be economically viable and find use cases. It was costly, it was complex, and there basically was also no market demand for it. But of course, today, we are using machines like this, and we have machines much more powerful in our pockets. Everybody has a smartphone. Maybe even our watch is 100 times more powerful than this computer. And if you take a look at the picture to the right, you see again an early stage machine. It's the IBM Q System 1, created in 2019. It's equally bulky and costly, just like the ENIAC was in the 1940s. So quantum computers have been a thing of the future for decades, and one may be forgiven for sort of thinking that their impact on cybersecurity does not need to be our top concern today. But I think if you take these two pictures side by side, you cannot ignore these developments. Let's be a bit more specific. When do we think that quantum computers will be ready to threaten today's encryption? Here we see a graph of the evolution of various quantum technologies and not their processing power, but sort of the qubits that they work with. We see at the moment we're somewhere in the magnitude of 10 to the 4. People think that, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around this, once we reach an order of magnitude of 1 million qubits, there might be quantum computers that are capable of encrypting today's RSA encryption. So there is still some time, but there are also developments that we cannot ignore. And there's one thing that needs to be said very clearly. Financial data has high longevity and is very sensitive. And there is the threat of harvest now, decrypt later, that would really undermine trust in financial systems. And that scenario is that internet traffic is intercepted today and stored and decrypted in the years to come once such computers are ready. And that means even if from a pure technology point we are not there yet, we need to start the transition to quantum safe encryption now. And that's what we do in the Innovation Hub with 3 projects. I'll now pass on to Beju from the Toronto Centre, who will present 2 exciting projects, Polaris and Fuse. Beju, over to you.
Move to the next slide, please. Before I get into the projects, I just wanted to give you a bit more of the landscape of the projects that we have in the Innovation Hub that help us better understand some of the implications of the quantum threat and applications of quantum safe approaches. Project Polaris, whilst focused on cybersecurity for CBDC systems and future monetary systems that would need to operate both online and offline, highlighted the importance of quantum readiness, crypto agility, and operational agility for central banks. Project Fuse explored a microservices-based architecture for a scalable settlement engine and experimented with post-quantum cryptography, exploring the interplay between scalability, flexibility, and future security needs when designing such systems. Project Leap looked directly at quantum-safe communication channels, testing whether central banks could exchange messages securely in a future where today's cryptography may be broken. And finally, Project Tourbillon centered on privacy-preserving CBDC prototypes and raised important questions about how quantum computing might undermine privacy guarantees, but also how new cryptographic approaches could address that. We move on to the next slide. Now, I want to discuss the threat landscape a little bit. Let's imagine the cyber threat landscape as an iceberg. What we see above the waterline is only a fraction of the danger. Above the surface are the visible attacks like ransomware, phishing, data breaches, and even supply chain compromises. And as I mentioned yesterday, these are increasingly converged with financial crime. Ransomware proceeds are laundered using cryptocurrencies. Cyber intrusions are used to enable data theft and fraud, with identity theft feeding into money laundering networks. What once were considered separate domains of cybercrime and financial crime are intertwined. Now, just below that lie the risks from rapid growth of digital payments. Instant transfers, mobile wallets, stable coins, cryptocurrencies. These innovations bring speed and efficiency, but also provide new channels that threat actors exploit to move illicit funds quickly and anonymously. Deeper still are the systemic vulnerabilities, reliance on common vendors, concentration in cloud services, and interdependencies across systems. And these create the risk that a single compromise could cascade across institutions and the financial system. Beneath that are our own cyber resilience frameworks, which provide the ability to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And these frameworks are essential for prevention and limiting the damage of cyber incidents. But at the base of the iceberg lies the quantum threat. It may seem distant, but once realized, today's cryptographic protections could fail, undermine the security of digital systems, and as Raphael mentioned, also the integrity of our financial data, and therefore threatening trust in the financial system. Now, these visible threats are serious, but the layers beneath may prove even more consequential. So true resilience means preparing for all layers of the iceberg. I'll now move on to discussing 2 of the projects that we mentioned earlier. So if we move to the next slide. The first project I'll discuss is Project Polaris. Now, as we think about payments modernization, it's obvious that cybersecurity has to be at the core of system design from the outset. And this is particularly true when considering systems that involve offline payments. As part of this project, we conducted a survey of central banks, with 98% agreeing that offline functionality would be needed or beneficial for either inclusion or resilience needs primarily. The survey also raised many security and integrity concerns that would need to be better understood. So Polaris provides a body of work to central banks to navigate the range of complex interrelated topics covering the intersection of cybersecurity and the future of money and payments. Firstly, the handbook on offline payments asks, what does it mean to enable payments when there is no connectivity? It discussed the reasons for offline payments, the technologies available, the security aspects, and the trade-offs that would need to be considered between achieving resilience, inclusion, and privacy. but also what the possible security and integrity risks are and their mitigants. For example, new technologies, new types of devices, and the lack of real-time monitoring over those devices in offline payments exposes new attack surfaces and vulnerabilities. The handbook helps central banks considering offline payments to navigate some of these complexities. Secondly, a baseline 7-step cybersecurity framework asks, how should we think about cybersecurity prevention and defenses for CBDC systems, both offline and online? As security needs to be holistic. The framework, which can be further developed by others, identifies 7 steps: prepare, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and adapt. And each of these steps has control measures to consider, with a large number focused on prevention. It also highlights how response and readiness would need to adapt when operating offline payments. For example, in the case or perception of a compromised device in circulation, which could undermine trust. This would require very different response to incident management than central banks may be used to. The third output looks at threat modeling gaps and asks the question of where do our existing threat models fall short? A threat model is a structured approach to identifying, understanding, and mitigating potential security threats to a system. And it provides a security view, focused view of the system and its environment, helping organizations proactively address vulnerabilities and risks. But until recently, threat models didn't really cover DLT-based or tokenized systems. The analysis highlighted issues such as vulnerabilities in smart contracts and the increased exposures in software supply chains, which would need to be considered if central banks adopt these new technologies. The paper also had a call to action underscoring the need for a new baseline threat model. Next, we have a design guide for offline payments, which asked what design choices could apply to offline payments, and it illustrated that these design choices on 3 generic scenarios, which central banks can adapt for their own purposes. But one common denominator across all of those scenarios is underscored the importance of crypto agility, so building systems so that algorithms can be replaced in the future as needed. And this is particularly complex when considering offline payments functionality, given the potential proliferation of devices and endpoints that would need to be secured and updated. Now, based on the call to action in the paper, there is a forthcoming cyber threat model, which asks, what are the adversaries, attack paths, and systemic vulnerabilities that we should be thinking about? And finally, a sample of technical requirements and a test sandbox provides central banks that are interested in offline functionality with a starting point from which to explore questions and further refine their technical requirements. Now, looking across all of these outputs, 2 questions really stand out as we think about payment system modernization. How do we design for operational agility such that controls and processes can evolve with the threat landscape? And how do we ensure crypto agility such that systems can migrate to new cryptography, including quantum-resistant methods without heavy redesign? Which brings me to Project Fuse, if we move on to the next slide. So Project Fuse, which stands for the Fully Scalable Settlement Engine, experimented with post-quantum cryptography and explored the interplay between scalability, flexibility, and future security needs when designing such systems in a modular way. Fuse adopted what is known as a microservice-based architecture. And what this means is that instead of adopting one monolithic approach, the system is broken down into independent modules, much like Lego blocks, connected together, but each carrying out a specific function. Now, this can have 2 benefits. The first is flexibility. Institutions can adapt or upgrade individual components without disrupting the whole system. And the second is scalability. When transaction volumes rise, only the modules under pressure need to be scaled and not the entire platform. But these benefits come with trade-offs. More modules means more boundaries to manage. If you imagine the lines between all the little Lego blocks, they all need to be managed. And the interdependencies between them means more to think about. And therefore, there is a wider surface area to secure. In practice, the flexibility and scalability of microservices would need to be balanced with tighter operational discipline, particularly when it comes to security processes. As I mentioned, the project also experimented with post-quantum cryptography, algorithm designed to resist the future threat posed by quantum computing. Fuse tested lattice-based schemes, including Crystal's dilithium for signatures and Falcon for verification. Both were chosen because one has been announced that it will be standardized following its draft publication 2023, and one is in the standardization process, such as Falcon, but expected to be used in much niche, in niche specialized use cases. Now, the key lesson here was not that PQC is ready for deployment, but actually rather that crypto agility is essential. Systems must be able to swap algorithms in and out as standards evolve. And this is where the interplay between architecture and security becomes clearer. Microservices may make it easier to insert cryptographic modules without destabilizing the system. But PQC algorithms are heavier with larger keys and signatures, creating latency and potential throughput issues. Therefore, in a microservices architecture, that overhead can multiply every service boundary between modules. However, modular design and PQC could also reinforce each other, but only if we anticipate the costs and overhead of moving a large cryptographic payloads through such a system. Scalability could help offset these costs and overhead through more compute nodes or managing loads across servers, but choices would need to be made to decide where the balance between performance and security lies. Fuse underscored that security, scalability can pull in different directions. And it showed that flexibility and crypto agility can be engineered into the foundation of systems. However, this would, as I mentioned, come with operational complexity and performance trade-offs. A highly modular system allows easy upgrades, but more interfaces and dependencies accretes the attack surface. Scaling up to handle higher volumes is attractive and possible, but that scaling should not weaken operational resilience or introduce systemic fragilities. And we need to ask ourselves, how do we prepare for quantum risks and changing operational processes without compromising today's reliability and ultimately trust? Preparing systems to migrate to PQC is essential. The standards come into place. But doing so prematurely or without maturity and also with some readiness gaps as the operational ecosystem and certifications and oversight frameworks that need to also mature and become ready. And without that, could also disrupt current operations as well. So these things really need to be thought about in advance. Thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Raphael for the next slide.
Thank you very much, Beju. I think you highlighted clearly how that already designing new systems to the quantum threat is a major task, right? There are many architecture trade-offs. We need to not only zoom in on one algorithm, but keep in mind that we're hitting a moving target. But we need to be cognizant that there is what I should state an even much more difficult problem, which is making sure that existing systems become resilient to the quantum threat. And that's what we do with LEAP. We've started LEAP actually 2 years ago. And in the first phase, what we did is we built a quantum secure VPN between a server in Paris, hosted by Banque de France, and another server in Frankfurt, hosted by Bundesbank. And we exchanged some payment messages through that VPN and documented operational issues and performance measurement. I'll get back to these in a second. We also held a conference to sort of bring together both public and private sector participants and start talking about sort of the alignment that is needed to get the transition going. And we published a set of papers, some looking at sort of the opportunities from quantum computers and the threat, and another one that I'll actually conclude with that lays out the quantum readiness for the financial system. Currently, what we're doing is we've started LEAP Phase 2. And LEAP Phase 2 aims at implementing quantum-safe cryptography to a payment system. We'll publish this report later this fall. And I want to give you a bit of a sneak preview into what we're going to be discussing in very detail in the report. So let me start by saying that LEAP 2 is a collaborative effort. In the second phase, we have Banca d'Italia, Banque de France, Deutsche Bundesbank, and we have Nexi and SWIFT. And we want to implement and validate quantum-safe cryptography in an existing test environment of a payment system. So the test environment's configuration really reflects a realistic operational scenario of a payment system, obviously while being an isolated space where we can test the integration of post-quantum cryptography. And we already ran some tests. Liquidity transfers were sent between Project Leap's central bank partners using post-quantum digital signatures via the usual payment network led by the network service providers that participate in Leap 2. And in order to achieve this, multiple components of the system needed reconfiguration and adaptation to the new cryptographic standards. The technical experiment required extensive planning, tight collaboration, and commitment from different departments across organization, obviously including payment system experts, cryptography experts, but also including many legal and procurement experts who sort of understand how business process changes will affect the overall operational setup. And the project is really a case in point. Migration to quantum-safe cryptography is not only a simple cryptographic protocol upgrade. It's a major transition that requires broad collaboration across the financial system. Let's actually start with the technical side. In both phases of Project Leap, here we have the results from Leap 2, but also for Leap 1, there were similar findings. Performance measurements revealed significant differences between PQC and traditional cryptography. Here, you see the graph for processing a payment message signed with a PQC digital signature, and the average verification time was 210 milliseconds, whereas with classical encryption, the average time was just shy of 30 milliseconds. So a 7-fold difference in sort of time needed to perform the same operation. In addition to performance, there are some key learnings that again relate to cryptographic agility, what Beju already mentioned before. This is a key success factor, and it's the ability to switch between cryptographic schemes and algorithms without affecting the application itself. And making central bank systems more agile takes time, as they were not built with this agility in mind, right? You have one fixed algorithm that is encoded somewhere in the system, and you need to go to a new system where you can flexibly change between algorithms according to each application. And because the system is highly interconnected, and because sort of we have these technical findings that document performance is going to be affected, and the transition is not trivial, we really need a proactive and coordinated approach. And that's where we come to sort of the overarching findings. To ensure quantum readiness of the financial system, we need to obtain engagement. This includes raising awareness among financial institutions and FMI actors. This is what we're doing today. This is what we're doing with our reports. But we also need to plan the implementation meticulously. So due to the interconnected nature, quantum-safe cryptography must be introduced in a coordinated manner. It doesn't help if I upgrade, but you don't. And stakeholders will need to align on the timeline and key technical choices of the transition. Once the priorities and requirements are set, key technical choices are made, and the overall timeline is agreed, actors of the financial system need to create really a detailed implementation plan that specify the steps of achieving quantum readiness. What exactly do we want to accomplish by when? And last, following the transition, the planning phase, we will need to execute this. This will be on the private side mostly, but central banks and supervisors may need to play a key role in monitoring this process. There needs to be a regular follow-up, continuous alignment, which will help to ensure that everything is executed in time. At the end of the migration journey, we must make sure that the financial system maintains a high level of protection against quantum computers. Let me close here. I think the key point is we see it's not trivial, it's a substantial undertaking. It's something that will need to happen in a very coordinated manner, and it's not a one-time sprint, but more of a continued marathon. Success will depend on seamless coordination, relentless testing, and unwavering commitment across the entire financial ecosystem, including central banks, supervisors, and the entire private sector. Let me stop here, and thank you very much.